angry, and mainly young women. Of course there were young men there as well, and some older people, but the anger among young women in this country on the question of violence against women is palpable, and for good reason, because what happened to Natasha O'Brien was not just that she was beaten almost to a pulp by a member of the Defence Forces, but then in the court the disgraceful pronunciation of the judge that this young man might lose his job, and he was an impressive young man, and he would not therefore give him a custodial sentence. That has become obvious now that this is a pattern with this judge. He is a disgrace, and that really rings alarm bells about why and how systemic domestic and sexual and gender-based violence against women is prevalent in this country. But yet we have a system where judges who are appointed by the government in this House do not seem to be accountable to anybody. And I'm not allowed to say this, that a judge is disgrace, and I'm certainly not allowed to say it inside the chamber because of the separation of powers. I am going to say it, but what sort of a country do we live in where the government get to appoint judges who then treat a very serious question of domestic violence and violence against women as a flippant arrangement and dismiss it in order to defend men in uniform? And this has been a habitual practice of this particular judge, and we've seen it in many, many court cases. And we'll see it again unless the systemic problem is dealt with. And last week I challenged the Minister for Justice, Helen McEntee, about the lack of progress on dealing with the question around domestic violence and violence against women. We still have 9 counties without a refuge space, and we still are less than half of the refuge spaces that the Istanbul Convention requires us to have. Why is that? It's not a shortage of money. She has doubled the budget from 20 million, more than doubled it, to 50 million. She's thrown money at the problem, but that doesn't work. The problem is systemic. It's deep in our psyche and in our psychology and in our society, and it's deep inside the system of capitalism, which denigrates women and encourages men to feel superior, to feel that they can do what they want to do and when and how they want to do it. And that's perpetuated inside our defence forces. And the Women of Honour have been fantastic and shown this, so I want to send full solidarity from People Before Profit to all of them. And we do need a serious, proper debate with real change, meaningful change at the back of it in this House. And we have written to the Ceann Comhairle asking for the Business Committee to allow time this week for a session on the question of violence against women and the Natasha O'Brien case. And we will be calling on the system to make judges accountable. It's not good enough to say separation of powers. We can't talk about that. That is really a disgraceful way to treat us as elected representatives. Secondly, and Mick will talk about this later on as well, and secondly I want to talk about the Aer Lingus dispute. I painfully listened to Willie Walsh, the union buster, being interviewed at length on radio this morning. And basically he said that Aer Lingus cannot afford to pay the pilots. Well, that's interesting, Willie, because executive pay has more than doubled in the last year, from 3 million to 6.2 million. And 3 million, a 1.3 million bonus went to one executive alone. So if the pilots are making sacrifices during COVID, if they are the ones that we rely on to carry us from one city to another through the skies in safety, hundreds and thousands of us rely on them, then why are executives so handsomely reimbursed and the pilots themselves are not? We all know they've gone into separate talks in the Labour Court this morning, but we don't see this as a case of equals. It is not a case that the workers are equal in their complaints to the bosses, equal in their complaints. In actual fact, management need to have a look again at what they're asking for. And as the pilots themselves had said, they are not going to pay for their own pay rise. Asking for productivity based on what is an inflation-related pay claim is not on, and we are with the pilots in this case, and we believe that the money is there in the airline. The British Airways pilots who are part of the IAG group have received the same pay increase that the Aer Lingus pilots are looking for. So this must be dealt with by management. We all have sympathy and we're all affected by it, the inability to travel, the cancellation of holidays and weddings and all, and that is disgraceful, but we put the blame with management and we want to see this dispute resolved. It's not about making productivity claims on the workers, it's about treating them the same as they treat their executives and the British Airways pilots.
So on Friday we had a very important victory in the High Court, where the High Court ruled that SIPO, the Standards and Public Office Commission, had provided inadequate reasoning in terms of why they decided not to follow up on my complaint about Leo Varadkar's leaking of the confidential GP contract to his friend, political supporter and head of the rival to the IMO, the NAGP, Matthew O'Toole. This has major implications, which we are going to bring into the Dáil this week. Those major implications are twofold. One are for SIPO themselves, because we know that this was the first ever judgment where a decision that SIPO made where they were divided themselves. They're divided 3-2. 3 were in favour of not proceeding with the investigation. 2, the Ombudsman and the Controller and Auditor General were in favour of proceeding with the investigation. And we know from freedom of information requests from Arthur Beasley at the Irish Times, the correspondence and the opinion that went on at that time, where one of those said at the time, a court order to reconsider rejection of a complaint would be appalling and would compromise the credibility of any subsequent decision we made. This has now come to pass, where you have a court order saying that SIPO needs to go back to this again to reconsider it. So it does raise very, very serious questions for SIPO about why they took this decision, whether they are in a position to really hold those who are powerful to account. That's what they're meant to be there for, and therefore the fact that they simply fell for the idea that Leo Varadkar says, I did it as Taoiseach, you can't investigate me, and effectively fell at the first hurdle, raises very, very serious question marks over their capacity to actually function as a watchdog for ethics in this country for those in the most powerful positions politically in this country. So we're going to be pursuing those questions. Obviously the ball is back in SIPO's court. We are urging an investigation be conducted as quickly as possible to be concluded before the next general election, so that if Leo Varadkar was to stand again in Dublin West, well then people would have the information, would have the findings of SIPO. The second issue very, very clearly is for the political system and is for the government, Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael and the Greens in particular. They rallied around Leo Varadkar. They allowed him to say he'd made a mistake, but it was kind of an honest mistake and no harm was done, to downplay it, and they allowed him to stay in position at that time as the Taoiseach. Simon Harris was a part of that. Now we should think, if Leo Varadkar had not gone, if he was still Taoiseach today, his position would probably be untenable. You have a situation where a High Court issues a judgment that is very likely to lead to an investigation by the ethics watchdog into what would be the Taoiseach. So his position would be entirely untenable. Do Fianna Fáil, do Fine Gael, do the Greens, does Simon Harris stand over the decision to back up Leo Varadkar, stand over the decision to say that he effectively did nothing substantial wrong, or do they recognise that was a very, very significant mistake? This was no small matter of what Leo Varadkar did back in 2019 in terms of the leaking of the document, and is a very bad example of very poor ethics, bad behaviour at the very top of Irish political life.
Morning everybody. Today I will be introducing this bill, the Voluntary Assisted Dying Bill. So obviously this bill intends to establish a legal framework in terms of assisted dying in Ireland, and it follows on from the Joint Committee on Assisted Dying, the main recommendations in terms of eligibility, in terms of safeguards, and in terms of in terms of oversight. So it's very, very important that this bill is debated in the lifetime of this government. I'm realistic. Will it be legislated in the lifetime of this government? It's probably highly unlikely, but there's definitely, after the Joint Committee on Assisted Dying, there's definitely a public appetite in terms of debating this issue and see where this issue goes. So I think this is the blueprint in terms of how assisted dying can operate in Ireland, and I'm very proud, and our party is very proud, that we're kind of at the forefront of this very, very important issue. And I just want to kind of get back to the Joint Committee on Assisted Dying. 11 people out of 14 supported legislation and that was kind of a cross-party, and I think sometimes this issue kind of transcends politics in some ways, so I'd hope to see where that kind of transcends into actually being legislated, and I'm realistic, it's probably not going to be this government, but obviously the next government, so I hope to get re-elected and to pursue that issue in this Dáil and the next Dáil.
Can I ask a question before you move on? Are you introducing it as part of this members' bill, as part of one of your sessions in the next Dáil term in September? Or
Well, we'll have to discuss that with ourselves. Our next private members is probably in September, so we'll have to discuss that kind of internally, whether we'll use our private members in terms of using this issue. It could get selected as in the lottery. That would be great, but then there's probably less than 6 months left of the government. The chance of it being legislated is very, very small, but I think it's important that it actually, and Taoiseach has said this, and the Taoiseach, that there will be a free vote if it comes down to a vote, and we'll see what the kind of composition of those that support the assisted dying. I mean, if it's anything to go by in terms of the Joint Committee on Assisted Dying, there's a clear majority, I think, of the Dáil at this moment in time that would support this legislation.
And just because you've obviously worked up your own bill in relation to this, so it's not exactly out of the power of the government to be able to do the same thing. Would you urge them to do what you've done and bring something forward that replicates the committee's recommendations before this term ends?
Well, obviously today, when I'm introducing the bill, I will say to Simon Harris, he can have the bill. This is the one I prepared earlier, and this is a bill that from the Bills Office it wouldn't be much different from actually what the Joint Committee have recommended. So it's there, they can take it and legislate for it. So it's possible. Whether there's a will, well, that's another matter. But we will keep pursuing this issue, whether it's this Dáil or the next Dáil.
Just to ask you as well, the Bishop's letter at the weekend, they made a lot of criticisms of the recommendations, also saying that they compared it kind of to the situation with abortion, where soon it would be intellectual disabilities eligible for it. I suppose, what's your reaction to that letter?
Well, there's no kind of surprise that the Catholic Church are against assisted dying, and obviously they said that when they were before the committee. But the rhetoric that those that are against assisted dying, particularly the Catholic Church, is very alarmist. What they've said about somebody with an intellectual disability should be kind of afraid that if assisted dying was legislated for. We've seen this kind of rhetoric used before in the repeal referendum. So very alarmist. And some Catholics do support assisted dying, and there's a clear majority in the state that would support a legislative change around assisted dying. So the Catholic Church are out of step in terms of where they're at with this issue, and they've been out of step in relation to a lot of issues over the last decades that the public are ahead, and the public are ahead of politicians and the Catholic Church and any religious organisation in terms of this particular issue.
So misogyny and sexism are embedded in the system in this country, and anyone who doesn't believe that just has to look at the number of state institutions who have been put under real pressure by the stand taken by one woman against it. The Defence Forces are panicked about the presence of convicted abusers within their ranks. The judiciary are well aware that Judge Tom O'Donnell is not the only judge who might have questions to answer on issues of this kind, and the government, who so many people believe correctly, have not done nearly enough on these issues. I understand that senior army officers met on Sunday night and are drawing up a list of Defence Force personnel who've been convicted of gender-based violence or are due in court to face accusations of it. That information should be released publicly. We know for a fact that it includes a member of the Naval Services boxing team who was convicted a year ago for punching a woman to the point that he permanently displaced her eye. Now, the Taoiseach Micheál Martin has denied that a senior army officer has given a character reference for Cathal Crotty in court. Technically, he's correct. Army officers are obliged to provide a report when a serving member of the Defence Forces is before a civil court. But the officer in question referred to Crotty as courteous, exemplary, professional and disciplined. It was a character reference by any other name. So the army should cease this practice straight away, and character references should be banned from court hearings dealing with gender-based and sexual violence. Change on these issues will come from below, from the people, not from above, from the establishment. And for this reason, I'm urging people to come out on the rows of protests that are being organised in Cork this Thursday, in Limerick tomorrow, and in Dublin tonight at 6 o'clock at the gates of the Dáil, where the rally will be addressed by Natasha O'Brien herself here at 6 o'clock tonight. Briefly on the Aer Lingus pilots. We support the pilots. We will argue the case for them on the floor of the Dáil. We will stand in support of them on their picket lines if it comes to that. We support the pilots because their pay claim is just. They have not had a pay increase for 5 years. No increase in basic pay in 5 years. During this time, prices have skyrocketed and their claim merely covers the increase in the cost of living. All workers should get cost of living increases. We also support them because their employer can well afford to pay this claim. Aer Lingus made 225 million in profit last year. IAG made 3.5 billion in profit last year. Ordinary families should not have their holidays disrupted by this dispute. The dispute should be settled, but the way in which it should be settled is on the basis of a just pay increase for Aer Lingus pilots, to set a guideline for all of the workers in the country who deserve to be fully compensated for the price increases of the last few years. Sinead.
I'd like to ask about the Defence Forces. I don't know if you yourself were a brief with answer just around obviously the incident we saw with Natasha O'Brien 2 years ago was obviously awful, and we've seen the Defence Forces now only coming to sanction these individuals who are involved in gender-based violence. Are you concerned that the only reason why the Defence Forces are acting on this now is because of the publicity these cases have received?
Well, we haven't actually seen the action yet. I mean, it's been rumoured, and Mick's report there of a meeting on Sunday night to identify who has been charged or who is about to appear before court is interesting, and obviously they are being put under pressure, and it's no wonder, because there's been a national outpouring of disgust and outrage by what happened in court in relation to Natasha O'Brien, and the soldier, corporal or whatever his name is, Crotty, Private Crotty. It's very hard to understand how a man at 20 years of age thinks that that's okay and can boast about it afterwards. So it's a very deep-rooted problem. But if you go into a job where you're trained to bash and kill and fight, then you have to be of a very high calibre to be able to, to carry through on that in a way that you know who your enemy is. But if the enemy is everybody, and in particular if the enemy is young women, then there's a real problem with misogyny inside the Defence Forces, and the first people that will testify to that are the women of honour. I mean, when they came out and said the stuff that happened to them, the rape within the ranks of the Defence Forces, both the Army and the Navy, absolutely horrific. So they've known there's a problem. It's taken them quite some time to set up the Tribunal of Inquiry, which ironically was set up on the day that the judgment of in Natasha's case came out. So there is a deep problem, as has been said, with the system in this country. It's with the judges, it's with the Defence Forces, it's with the courts. In the past it's been with the Gardaí, and it's certainly in here. The fact that we go in today and we're not allowed to open our mouths to criticise the judiciary is a nonsense. That the government appoint them, have no accountability for them, and then we're told shut up when you try to raise an objection to their behaviour. It really needs a huge reformation. I know it's not going to happen in the lifetime of this government, but the movement on the street has to guarantee, and it will, I'm sure, that the whole system has to fundamentally change. And long sentences are not the answer, but making it very clear to people that there are consequences for your behaviour has to be part of what happens. And there has to be more support for women. There has to be more refuge spaces, there has to be more psychological support, more encouragement for women to come out. There's probably a hell of a lot more cases, more than likely a hell of a lot more cases out there that we don't know of, that don't come to light. And so this is a systemic problem here, but it's an epidemic problem across the world. And we have to start asking ourselves serious questions about why it is that women are seen as, punch bags by a whole cohort of men. Not all men, obviously. I mean, there's more to being a man than just being, a violent bastard like that. But there is a cohort that seem to have it justified. And particularly if they're wearing a uniform, that seems to be, in this country, a badge of protection for them. That has to stop.